Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third in our series of Teacher Reflections webinars, during which we're privileged to be able to welcome guest speakers from some of our partner schools and organisations to discuss the autumn term to date, how staff and students have managed the return of all children to schools. My name is Andy Small, previously a teacher of 16 years and now a member of our Assessment Insights team, working with all of our independent schools. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by school leaders from two of our independent partner schools. Stephen Campbell is Deputy Head with an academic focus at Haileybury, a co-educational boarding school in Hertfordshire for pupils aged 11 to 18. Stephen's worked at the school for 3 years, having previously worked in a variety of different settings, including state and international schools. Stephen will shortly explore how CAT4 data, used alongside progress tests and attitudinal survey data, has been used to gain a greater understanding of pupils, informing their learning pathways and the support that teachers have been able to offer to them. Karen Wyborn is responsible for teaching and learning from the early years foundation stage through to year 8 at the Hawthorns School, a large co-educational prep school in Surrey. Karen's other responsibilities include leading on assessments, tracking and analysing data, as well as staff development. Karen will later discuss her return to school experience and how she's used CAT4 data, triangulated with other forms of data in teacher assessments to identify any misconceptions or gaps in knowledge so as to obtain a whole picture of every child in the school's care. On behalf of GL Assessment, I'd like to warmly welcome you both and thank you for giving up your time to talk with us today. If at any point during Stephen or Karen's inputs, any of our attendees have questions for them, please do post these in the Q&A function. I'll then pose these questions to our guests at the end of their respective talks. So Stephen, if I could please turn to you first and ask perhaps what has surprised you the most about the return to school this academic year? And if I forced you to sum it up in maybe just one word, what would that word be?
That's a really, really good question. I think what surprised me the most has been kind of how resilient everyone has been and how quickly routines and norms have been re-established and also how happy everyone is to be back as well.
Sure.
So that's definitely not one word, but maybe resilient.
But it's a really good answer and yeah, fantastic thing. So that's great. Thank you. I'll hand over to you because I know you've got some slides to share. If you're happy to do that now. Then we'll have a listen to what you've got to say. Thank you.
Okay, Andy, can you just confirm for me that you can see this okay?
Absolutely, I can, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So as Andy said, my name is Stephen. I work at Haileybury, which is, again, as Andy has already told you, a large independent boarding school in Hertfordshire, so just north of London. I'm going to speak for just a few minutes this morning, and I'm going to try and cover these 4 things. I'm going to talk to you about our intentions, what we're trying to do as a school, the data that we collect, what we found through the scrutiny of this data, and also what our proposed next steps might be moving forwards. As Andy's already kind of told you, at any stage you do want to ask any questions about anything, if anything's not kind of specific enough or you're not quite sure why some of the decisions that we've made have been made, please do ask any questions and I'm happy to try and answer them as best as possible. So in terms of our intentions, as already mentioned, we're a large independent boarding school. We look after children who are between the age of 11 and 18. Like many schools, we have a wealth of academic data, which is probably variable in terms of its use and its integrity. And historically, as a school, we've tended to use academic data retrospectively. So a typical review of data would be to look at the results of a previous academic year, whether they're GCSE or A-level, or we do the IB diploma here, so the IB results as well. And we might look at these results and identify trends and patterns that might come through those results. You know, departments that perform particularly well, groups of children that perform particularly well. This might then signpost and support any academic plans that we might put in place for the following year. And whilst there is definitely a logic to this, and actually, interestingly, when I reflect on previous schools in which I've worked, this seems to be a pattern that exists in many secondary or senior schools. It's, of course, retrospective, and our responsive plans to the pupils of last year might not necessarily be the best plans for the pupils of this year. Seems like a really silly thing to say, but of course pupils differ from year to year. What we have been missing, I feel, as a school is useful, real-time, reliable data to analyse. And that data also needs to be robust, of course. As Andy mentioned, I've worked in a variety of different schools. I worked in the state sector maybe 10 years or so ago. And in some of the schools in which I've worked previously, it's been a kind of creation of a data illusion. And what I mean by that is regular, internally produced data that's not standardized or controlled and that's collected on a regular basis. So, half-termly assessment points, for example. The issue for me with this data is that it looks as though it's meaningful. It creates some really interesting and some really nice patterns in spreadsheets. It looks like it's reliable. And yet many of the inferences that we might draw from this data are limited and more often than not a product of inconsistencies between teachers' interpretations of criteria, or in some places, external pressures placed on them by a system. So a teacher who's told, for example, that the children in their class have to make 2 sub-levels of progress every academic year is not perhaps going to be totally honest in the way that they report that data moving forward. So what we wanted to do at Haileybury is we wanted to create something that would be live, that would be useful, that would be reliable, and something from which meaningful inferences could be drawn. So to approach this, we considered the need to move towards having 3 different capture points, for want of a better explanation, in order to understand the pupils as individuals and the pupils as learners. And these 3 points are really, really important to understand. And the first of these points is a measure of what perhaps could be described as the pupil's raw ability. Whilst we could discuss in detail the relative merits and efficacy in doing this, it's clear that some kind of measure is needed in terms of this raw ability or potential, however you want to explain it. We use the CAT4 tests provided by GL to provide us with this measure. The reason for this is that we believe that the data is robust and it's informative, but also the profiles that are produced for individual pupils are detailed and useful for class teachers as well. So the first piece of information that we've got there is the child's potential or the child's raw ability, whichever of those 2 phrases you're more comfortable with using. In addition, we have already a great deal of useful internal data that allows us to track pupil progress relative to the cohort. This works, but it works on the assumption that our cohort as a whole is making good progress. So in addition, therefore, we wanted to have some kind of externally benchmarked, standardized test to measure performance and therefore give us an indication of or an idea of progress. And the GL progress tests in maths and English provide a perfect solution to this issue. And we made the decision to run these tests twice a year in order to be more confident that the outcomes were reliable and that they in fact told us what we thought they were telling us. Really interestingly, and Andy actually gave us some training on this a couple of weeks ago, GL runs a combination service which automatically identifies for us those pupils who are making better than expected progress or worse than expected progress when compared with baseline data. And this has been invaluable to us in terms of identifying pupils very quickly after the period when the school was physically closed, the pupils who are not where we would like them to be. So to recap, we've got kind of a measure of the pupils' raw ability or their potential. We've got a measure of their performance and how they're performing right now. And then the third piece of information that we really wanted to have, the final missing piece of the jigsaw for us, was a kind of measure of a pupil's academic wellness, for want of a better phrase. And the PASS test, or Pupil Attitudes to Self and School, again run by GL, they provide a really robust measure of this. So we are able to very quickly gain a sense of how individual pupils feel about their learning, how they feel about themselves as learners, and how they feel about their approach to their studies. And what we found through capturing all of this information at the start of this academic year and moving through to this point in the term was fascinating, really. And I could talk for hours and hours about it, but I've been told I've got a very kind of tightly marshaled amount of time to speak with you. We found really interesting things at individual level. We found interesting things at cohort level, but also interesting trends between sex and boarding houses. Rather than talk in general terms, I thought a specific example might help here. And this example, I'm going to explain it now. So we found that our year 9 girls were making average progress. They were okay. They were doing pretty much as well as they should be. And they were actually making slightly stronger progress in maths than they were in English, which we found interesting. We found that they were an able year group. So Cat 4 showed us that their potential was strong. So, in some senses, we're quite happy with them making average progress given their profile. So they're performing well, but in relative terms, of course, they could be doing better because they could be making better than expected progress. We all want all of our pupils to make better than expected progress, of course. And our past data flagged up to us that generally the year 9 girls felt as though their work ethic was really poor, which was really interesting to us because our internal data seemed to suggest that they were actually working very hard. Unpicking this a bit more, we could see that the girls in particular were working hard, but not feeling as though they were working hard and not making brilliant progress. So if you kind of take those 3 pieces of information together, what perhaps starts to come out of this is the idea that perhaps the pupils had forgotten how to work. So they knew that they needed to work hard, but their capacity to understand how to work, how to revise, how to complete tasks had maybe fallen away. Their revision, their consolidation, their strategies for learning outside of the classroom had maybe decreased in terms of their capacity to do these things, which maybe was the explanation behind why they were seen to be working hard in school. So we were saying that we thought they were working hard, but actually they were reporting that they didn't feel as though they were, and actually their progress was not as good as it could have been. This allowed us then to understand how to put a package of support and intervention in place for these pupils. And actually, as part of the PASS assessment package, there are intervention strategies that GL actually suggest for individuals or groups of pupils. And for me, actually, this was really interesting because I've struggled for years and years to try and understand which strategies work best with which pupils. And this level of support kind of directing me to consider specific interventions for specific pupils has been really, really helpful. The really powerful thing for me as well is that we can measure the impact of these interventions in March of next year with our next round of progress testing and next round of PASS testing as well. And because we're leaving the testing pattern for a few months, actually we can be really sure that what we see in the next round of testing is genuine and is a product of any changes that we might have made. So just finally then, one of our major challenges moving forwards is around who owns the data that we have in school, who works through it, who signposts the intervention and the action steps. At Haileybury, we have heads of year who are being trained in this over the coming weeks, so that when our next cycle comes around in March, they will be ready to conduct analysis and decide on intervention and support plans at individual, class and year group level. I feel as though as a school, we're being really empowered by the information coming through from the GL testing that we're doing. We can be really secure and confident in our identification of pupils and equally confident in the approaches that we're taking to support them in gaining in confidence moving forwards. Okay, so I'm going to pause there, Andy, and ask you to let me know if there have been any questions and I can do my best to answer them.
Thank you, Stephen. That was a really fascinating insight. I mean, we have had a question, although it relates to a competitor and their products. So we might leave that one for the moment and maybe not draw direct comparisons. We'll focus on your use of our assessments, I think.
I can say, Andy, if it's okay, that we used to use Chem and we moved away from Chem to GL.
Oh, okay. Well, that probably answers the question fantastically. So thank you for that, and I hope Sam answers your question too. Certainly, what you said about the data illusion. I also worked in state schools for a long time, and that completely resonated with me. I thought that was a really interesting take on it. Absolutely the case, and I'm glad to hear that the assessment insight support has been really valuable to you as well. Certainly, anybody who does make use of PASS would certainly propose that using the PASS intervention tool would be a good action from there. We do have another question here about how you assessed the students' attitudes. Stephen, would you be happy to talk a little bit about your use of PASS in terms of the administration and then what you did with that?
Yeah, sure. So we ran PASS through some of the subject lessons. So it was very, very easy to run, very easy to administer. I think it takes anywhere between 10 minutes and 30 minutes. I think for some pupils it takes a little bit longer. One of the most interesting things about it is that it's self-reporting. So as mentioned, it's not us saying that the pupils aren't working hard, or it's not us saying that the pupils don't think very much of themselves. It's as learners, it's them kind of being posed a series of questions that sort of tease that attitude out. And then we compare this with what's perhaps a slightly more traditional measure, where we report internally on people's attitude to learning, and that's obviously perceived attitude. So we look at them and we think they look like they're working hard, and then we can correlate that with whether they feel they're working hard, for example. And then there are obviously other kind of sub questions and sub elements to that as well to consider.
And I think what you said earlier on about the girls and their work ethic, and how your interpretation of that was actually different to their own. Yeah, that's, I think, the magic of the Pupil Attitude survey.
Yeah, we have Andy. We've just run the PASS for the sixth form, which is a slightly different module, I think. And as mentioned earlier, we have the IB diploma and we have the A-level track in the sixth form. Typically speaking, an A-level pupil will have 24 contact periods out of 37 in a week, and an IB pupil will have nearly 37 contact periods out of 37 in a week. Their weeks look very different. The IB is it's not kind of more common, more difficult per se, but actually there's more contact and there's more required of the pupils. And what's really clear coming through the PASS is that the A-level pupils think that they're working far, far harder than the IB pupils. So there's something there. We haven't quite had time to think about why that might be the case, or what that shows us, or what we do with that. And they only came in yesterday. So again, a really interesting piece of information that comes from that.
Yeah, great. I'm glad there's value in it. Now, we've had a couple of questions about what you said about the progress test series. I can clarify that at the moment our progress test series is not adaptive. We do have some adaptive reading and spelling testing, but not the progress test in English and maths. But you mentioned you used it twice a year. Now, obviously, at the moment, there is no second form. It's something that we are working on, and trials are happening right now, and will continue into the spring and summer term for a Form B for Progress Test Series. But Stephen, are you happy to just clarify your use of PT Series at Haileybury and how you managed to do it twice a year?
Yeah, so we have, as mentioned earlier, we have kind of two major assessment points of the year. I read something. I'm going to give a really frustrating answer to this because I'm going to kind of quote somebody or cite something without any kind of concrete reference point. But I read something really interesting that seemed to suggest that if you test children every half term, the progress that the margin of error in the information that you take from comparing the two data points is bigger than the progress that they're likely to make between those two data points. So actually, again, it's back to that kind of point of data illusion almost. So we run two points in the year, one towards the start, so one around kind of October half term, and then one at the midpoint, so March time. We sort of have end of year exams as well, but not really. Kind of always been a little bit mystified by the idea that you would do a series of tests at the end of the year and then your teachers would say goodbye to you without the opportunity to actually try and work with you on improving as a consequence of those assessments. So yeah, we run them kind of October half term and then around about March time, late March, just before Easter. The children don't pick up on the fact that there's an element of repetition to the testing. They do lots of other things. We don't talk to the teachers about what's on the tests either, so they can't teach to them. That's quite deliberate. And they give us really, really good information. What's most satisfying is that most of the time they tell us what we think they're going to tell us, and then every time there's a small number of pupils who come out either much better than we're expecting them to, or much worse than we're expecting them to, and that's really helpful for us. Yeah,
and certainly my experience was much the same, using PT reads every 6 months. As you do. I did that in my last post in prep school, and yeah, much the same sort of experience. I think any assessment should have the capabilities to surprise. So in some ways it's good that it does that, but also affirms some of the things that you also knew. A couple of others if we have time here. One is hopefully very quickly answered in terms of sharing information with parents. Do you share the reports with parents? Do you make the decision to run the individual reports with parents and send those out?
So we haven't done that yet. We are discussing whether we do this. We've kind of been, well, we've been doing this for about 12 months now, and we brought more and more things on stream as we've been going through the process. And what we wanted to do is be really, really clear about what we were seeing in the tests, really, really clear about what we were going to do before opening ourselves up and discussing with parents. We will do over the next few months. But like I said, we wanted to be totally clear in what we were doing and totally clear that what we were doing was right before opening ourselves up.
Sure. Well, thank you. I'm very conscious of time, and obviously we have Karen waiting to come into bat as well. But Stephen, for the moment, thank you very much. We'll return to you a little bit later on. And if your questions to Stephen have not been answered, then rest assured that we will be working our way through these and getting answers to you. So Karen, if I can turn to you now, and thank you again for joining us. Can I start by asking the same question I directed at Stephen earlier on, and invite you to share perhaps which single word might summarise for you what has surprised you about the start to the academic year at the Hawthorns?
Yes, of course. Funnily enough, I actually came up with the same answer as Stephen, and that was resilience. And that's resilience of our staff and our pupils. And it's amazing to see how just flexible and adaptive they were actually coming back in. You know, lockdown was a different experience for everybody. So actually coming back into school this term, I just think they've been extremely resilient.
And that's fantastic. And in my conversations with schools, it does seem like the students have done that across the country. It's to everybody's testament, I think, the staff and the students alike. Karen, thank you. And if you'd be happy to share your screen now, then we'd look forward to hearing your thoughts on the year so far.
Brilliant. Okay, well, as mentioned, my name is Karen Wyborn. I'm the Deputy Head Academic at the Hawthorns School, which is a large prep school in Surrey. It's co-ed, and we take children from 2 years in our nursery up to year 8. And I'm just been asked to talk about our return to school, how we did it, what kind of data we looked at, what the children, how they responded and things like that. So I'll go through that. And please do ask questions. I'd be very happy to answer those afterwards. Okay, let me just change the screen. So going to be looking at returning to school. Going to be talking about the CAT4 test as well, and then looking at individual pupils and how we look at a triangulation of data to review each child individually. Okay, so returning to school, I think the same with everybody. You know, the priority was getting back to school safely. So following all the guidelines, making sure your health and safety is as it should be, but also looking after the individual well-being of pupils as well, and the staff. I think we probably had quite a few anxious members of staff before they returned to school, and we did various things to try and settle them to make sure that it was a good environment for pupils to come back in. So we did, you know, some members of staff hadn't been in school since March, and they were returning in September. They were very anxious, so we did like an orientation session so they could see all the health and safety procedures we had in place. We made sure that we regularly communicated with them. We did staff competitions just to keep morale up and just to try and ensure, even though we weren't seeing them, that our relationships were there, and that kind of laid the foundations for pupils coming back as well. And we just realized that we had to be flexible. We had to work with individual members of staff, but also the children as well, and understanding that, you know, lockdown and the summer holidays and the way that it works had different effects on everybody, and some people were really eager to come back. They couldn't wait to come back, and that's, you know, children and adults alike, and some were really anxious about it, and that's what we had to identify and actually work with them so that they felt comfortable coming back to school. And then obviously with the constant reviewing of the regulations and the health and safety, you've all been through it, I'm sure, know exactly what I'm talking about. So when the children actually came back into school, our first priority had to be well-being, making sure that the children are okay, they settled back in okay. So that was the priority. And we did lots of different things. Form teachers worked really closely and tutors worked closely with their tutees, just to make sure they were okay. And life continued in lockdown over the summer holidays. We have children with safeguarding issues, we have children who parents have got cancer, we've got all sorts of things, as I'm sure everybody does. Life continued, and the addition of lockdown, the restrictions obviously did have a large impact on some, so that was definitely our priority. And then obviously across the country, schools did a baseline assessment just to see where children were at, and we did have really good remote learning. We did it online, we did some live lessons. We didn't do all live lessons, we did some live lessons. So our pupils had the opportunity to keep on learning to our high standard. But one thing I was really conscious of is that, there are going to be misconceptions, there are going to be gaps in knowledge that we needed to identify. So through our baseline assessments that were written internally in maths and English, all the way through the school. Obviously with the younger ones, it was approached in a slightly different way, but these assessments allowed us to identify any misconceptions and any gaps, and that was from a cohort level, a set level, down to individuals. And then our staff actually changed their schemes of work, they adapted them to actually address any concerns that we did kind of pick up, just to make sure that children had the secure knowledge to build on, so that they have their building blocks in place so that we can actually progress through this term. And I think that was, for me, that was extremely important and a very valuable assessment. And some year groups we found actually did have big gaps in knowledge, and interestingly, particularly in maths, where others it wasn't as evident, and they just needed a general recap before we actually moved on. So that's probably one of the big things that we found. We use CAT 4 within our school, and we use this annually. We focus on the autumn term doing it with years 5 and 6 pupils, mainly with a senior school focus, thinking about their entrance exams, as I'm sure a lot of you are in that position at the moment where those exams are looming, or they're doing their ISEBs and all sorts of things now. CATs are really, really important. We do them in other year groups as well. We do them in year 3. We do usually do them in the autumn term, but we actually made the decision not to do them in the autumn term. In year 3, we do paper-based ones rather than digital. Year 5 and 6 pupils do them digitally, but we felt our year 3s weren't quite in the right frame of mind to do their CAT, so we've actually delayed those slightly, and we will do those later in the year. So we did our CATs with our year 5 and 6 pupils. We actually did them on iPads. It was the first time we've done them on iPads. All our year 5 and 6 have one-to-one devices, so it's really easy and convenient way of doing it. We do the CATs over 3 sessions for the 3 parts, and that seems to work well, and pupils respond well to it. When they have done the data, obviously the best thing about it is when they've done the test, the data is instant, so we can actually go in and have a look. And we do use the data in a variety of ways. As mentioned, one of the big ways we use it is for senior schools guidance and kind of checking that the children are going for the right schools. It's not the only data we use, but it's it's really good, and we do share that information with parents as well. Everyone has a senior school guide. We sit down with the parents, we discuss the results, we talk about other data, we look at the holistic view as well to make sure we're looking at the whole child, and obviously talking about those senior schools. And we do that obviously throughout year 4 and year 5, but autumn term of year 6 is a key time as well, before those deadlines of applications when they're due in. So we use it through those. But with the CAT 4, what I find really interesting is that because we use it year on year, we actually can really track and monitor the pupils, but also it actually helps us to identify those areas that we need to maybe work with the pupils on. And the detailed CAT reports that you do get for teachers and for parents as well are really useful, and it allows us to look at it at a high level, but actually drill down into individual pupils as well. Interestingly, both of our year groups, year 5 and 6, actually increased the average score overall, with 75% of pupils actually increasing their own individual average year on year. This really surprised me because of lockdown and because of, you know, the break in the summer and, you know, everything not being quite normal. I wondered if it actually wouldn't be as high. And yeah, so that did surprise us. We don't normally get such an increase, but I think maybe with the lockdown and parents very conscious of upcoming exams, they did put a little bit more focus on, you know, working towards it. Not that you can really practice for cats in as such, but you know, they had that mindset, so they were working maybe on their reasoning skills and things over lockdown. But overall, it actually we did have discrepancies. We had children who were completely you know, their overall average or the individual scores did not marry up at all with the previous year, and there were some large discrepancies. And that's what we, when we actually used our past data to support the CAT scores and actually drilled down, and we found that those who had lower CAT scores had low self-esteem, their confidence in their own learning was low, and things like that. And if we look at it, and I'll talk about this in a second, in the, you know, the triangular, you know, to look at all the different aspects of their well-being as well. There are actually external circumstances going on in their lives as well, which actually caused their results to dip. So there were reasons behind it, but I think with the CAT data, with our baseline and with our past survey, it actually allowed us to drill down and actually identify what was going on with those individual pupils. So when we're looking at individual pupils, we actually look at 3 kind of areas to make sure that we're getting that holistic view. So we do look at data. We looked at the baseline, we looked at CATs, and we looked at the past data as well. And we like to use more than one piece of data, which you should do, to make sure that it's not a blip or, you know, something like that. So we use the data, but we use a range of data. We do really value our teacher feedback. So they see the children, you know, the form teachers see them every day. They see what they're like. They're liaising more closely with parents than maybe I am or SLTR. So we actually do really welcome our teacher feedback. We look at their classroom performance, their attitude to learning. We look at their well-being. And then on the other side of the triangle, the third side, we actually look at external factors as well. So we look at actually how they responded to lockdown. And we did a survey with parents before they came back to school, so they could actually let us know how the children were during lockdown, and if there was anything significant like that we needed to know. Maybe there'd been a death in the family, whether related to COVID or not, you know, so we actually could get a picture of our pupils to make sure that we knew where they were when they came back. But also family situations, you know, whether, you know, parents are separating, or there's an illness in the family, or you know, granny's died or something like that, just so that we can make sure that we're looking after our children and we're actually showing the care that we need to. But also, you know, everything impacts each other. So, you know, if you're having a hard time at home, obviously it affects your performance in class as well, and it can affect your the data in the tests. So we actually look at everything. We discussed each individual child, making sure that we know where they're at, and this was done within year groups, and then actually flagged up to our head of school, and then came up further to SLT, so that we could know if there were any pupils that we needed to be aware of. And it's just getting the overall view of pupils. But one thing I will say is that the data was really important, and actually kind of showed where each child was at and how we can support them and address their misconceptions, and actually praise them when they, you know, when they do something well and they grasp, or they, you know, they get the gap, and they suddenly understand it in that light bulb moment. You know, we really do celebrate them and actually help them, you know, help them recognize their achievements and their attitude to their learning as well. So I'd say, kind of in conclusion to all of that, is, you know, we actually, you know, we use the data, we look at their well-being, we look at external circumstances as well, to actually get a picture of each of our pupils individually, which, especially after lockdown and the long summer, was really important. And we've had a successful term. With everybody, it's been ups and downs, with pupils and staff, and, you know, second lockdown and things like that. But, you know, I would say that we're in a good position. We have had struggles, pupils have had struggles, but we have overcome these by actually working together as a team and caring for each individual child. Andy, I shall pass back to you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. I mean, that's really, really interesting, and just picking up on a few things you said there. I mean, what really comes through is how much you value your teacher's judgment, and how listening to everybody involved in that sort of team around the child has informed practice. And you mentioned about delaying CAT testing this year in one particular year group for that reason. I think it's really important with any of this data that triangle that we can see on screen now absolutely rings true, and the context that stakeholders in a child's education can bring is perhaps the one thing that the data can't provide around that individual. So great to hear about that triangulation, and I'm sure that hearing about your experiences this term would have been really, really valuable to so many of our attendees. So thank you for that. We have had a couple of questions here. I'm very conscious that some other questions are coming through for Stephen as well. So I'd repeat that if we don't manage to get through all of the questions this afternoon, that we will try and make sure we get answers to you in one way or another. In terms of baselining, I know that part of your responsibility is early years, and there can all sometimes be two different interpretations of baselining. You mentioned the term baseline. Do you use the GL baseline? Is one question that's come in from an attendee.
We do. I wasn't actually referring to the GL baseline. We did internal assessments, which we kind of called the baseline for the year, but we do use the baseline from GL and the progress baseline as well for our reception pupils. We've used it for a number of years. We find it very successful. We do it with teachers, obviously do it individually with the children. They use an iPad. We have found the best way is actually to have objects for the children to count as well, rather than doing it all on screen, because the way that we teach, we don't just teach on the screen and get them to do it in their heads. We actually get them to use things to count with, as you do with the younger children. So we do allow them to have those with them while they're doing it. But the actual results of the baseline are actually pretty spot on, and we find that, if we find that they're more able in the baseline, they actually generally are. It actually does ring true. And I know when we first started using it, I will be honest, we're a bit like, oh, how's it gonna, is it gonna line up with our professional judgment, I guess. And I have to say it really does. What I love though is that when you do the progress baseline towards the end of the year, it really does show the amazing progress these children make, and that they come on with leaps and bounds. And even those children who were really weak to start with, after a year of being in reception and all their input and the amazing teaching, you can actually see the outcome and how much they have progressed, and it is amazing. And then using that as part of our data that we track throughout the school, going all the way through, it's actually really valuable data, having it from reception and using that baseline through GL.
And that's great to hear. And having two young children, one who's gone through reception and one who's about to come next September, I have absolute respect for all those reception teachers, all those early years practitioners out there do an absolutely fantastic job. And it's great to hear that then feeds into what you then go on and do in other aspects of the pre-prep and the junior prep as well, presumably through your use of progress testing and, and feeding in that way as well. That's fantastic. And so in terms of value added and the progress that students make over time, one attendee here is asking how you might be able to measure that and make better than expected progress. How can you do that? I wonder whether this is around the progress tests and the progress categories within it. Do you make use of those, Karen?
Yes, we do progress testing as well. Obviously, we missed our progress tests. We normally do them in May or June, and we actually made the decision not to do them in September. We're going to actually wait till May and June. Through those reports and the testing, we can clearly see the value added. We use all the different categories, so we can see whether it's expected or higher than expected progress. And we look at the data in different ways. So we use the GL reports quite closely, and teachers have access to the individual reports, so you can see exactly for each child. So if there's an anomaly or something like that, and they want to go right down to individual children, children, we do that. But we actually look at the overall data from individuals to the cohorts, to, to the whole school, and you can clearly see from the data, it's very easy to use where the value added is. And our value added for our English and our maths through the progress reports is phenomenal. And it's we obviously have those children that don't make that progress, but generally I would say that year on year if you track the children through the year, through the different year groups, their value added is clear to see from GL.
Yeah, that's great. That's good to hear. A question has come in about progress test scoring, and it might be that I can add some value to this one in terms of the context of the current time. We as a company are committed to having a look at how the picture has changed perhaps to the pre-COVID standardization. So hopefully very soon in the new term, there'll be some information out to schools around exactly what the picture looks like this year, in recognition of it being very different to previous years. So I hope that answers the question there. There are plenty still coming through. I mean, again, a question that went to Stephen. Karen, do you share reports with parents?
We don't actually share the GL reports, just more because of our parent body, and we share the data with them, absolutely, but we actually sit and have a meeting, a face-to-face meeting, and go through the report, but not actually giving them a report. So we give them all the information, but we don't actually give the CAT report to them. It was a big debate, and I've spoken to Norman at GL quite a lot about this, being a centre of excellence. We've had good and been open and honest about it, and some schools I feel it'd be very beneficial to share that data. With the parents that we currently have, we decided it was better to actually have the face-to-face conversation, share the information, but not actually give them the report.
And I think the context of each individual setting will determine that completely. Absolutely. One sort of more question from the attendees, if I can, Karen, and that is whether you set any targets for your children using any of the data that you get.
Yes, so from the CATs that we've actually just done, I go through the data, I look at the data from the previous year as well, see where there are any discrepancies in the individual topics, so the verbal and the non-verbal, the spatial, kind of all those different things. We look if there's a discrepancy. We look if there's over a 5-point discrepancy, but the more significant discrepancy of 10 points. From this, we actually set targets of pupils. So it might be that they have an English target, a maths target, or maybe a reasoning target, and we actually work with these children to actually try to understand whether it's they need extending or they need scaffolding. They have targets, but this is purely based from the CAT data that we have used. We monitor that every term. It's ongoing monitoring, obviously, but we actually set them a new target. Hopefully they've met that target in the term, and every term they have a new one until they do their next CATs. We've done this for 3 years now, and it's actually it's proved very successful because we can actually home in on individual targets for the children based on the CATs to actually help them to be more successful.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you. Such a full answer as well. And something that is clearly getting traction amongst those people who are with us is PASS and intervening. And both yourself and Stephen have mentioned using PASS and the information that comes from the Pupil Attitude to self and school surveys. Do you make use of the intervention tool, Karen, that comes with PASS?
We do, yes. We actually have only just started using that. So we've done PASS for probably 2 years now. So now we have some good data that we can look at with the pupils. We have started to use the interventions. The first probably year and a half we didn't. We do PASS twice a year with years 3 to 8. With our younger pupils, we actually only do it once a year. So we just do it in the May rather than October and May. We felt that was enough for our younger pupils. And I think there was a question about that as well. PASS is really easy to use for all ages. With the younger children, we tend to do teacher reads out the question and then they answer rather than obviously them doing it individually. But yes, we do use the interventions, but I would say I think similar to what Stephen was saying, sometimes it's hard to know exactly what intervention to do for certain children. And what I found really useful, it is actually really clear for this child, this will be really helpful, you know, try this. And we have found that is very useful. And the ones that we've tried so far have been really successful.
Yeah, there's a huge volume of potential interventions there, isn't there? And there's been an update as well for reconnections to school, of course. So there is plenty to mine, put it that way,
yes.
in the interventions tool. It might lead quite nicely actually on to me sharing one more slide. If I do this, then hopefully we can move to consider this here. One thing that we would be keen for any of our attendees to do is visit our website, and there you'll find a training hub where you can discover more about our offering of training for your team, and where you can find out about the range of different training sessions that are available to you, as well as online videos as well. The hyperlink in this slide will take you straight there, and all of the slides that you've seen today will be shared with you in due course. If the one-to-one post-testing data consultation would be of value to you, then that's sort of my day job, and I'd be happy to arrange an online call. So do click the link to initiate that if it would be of useful to you. We also have one other Teacher Reflections webinar ahead of the end of term. So Professor Adam Bodison, he's CEO at Nason and also the chair of Whole School SEND. Nikki Martin, inclusion consultant within the North Star Inclusion Advisory Team, and Mark Loveday, who's head of service and deputy head teacher at Chadsgrove School, will be talking next Tuesday afternoon, same time at 3:30, about how children with identified SEND have been supported in their return to school this term. So it would be great if there were people on the call who were able to join us for that session too. If you've missed any of our previous events, we've had focuses on reading and children's wellbeing. You can also find recordings of those on the GL Assessment website. So navigate to our events pages there to access those. As I say, there are lots and lots of questions. I'm going to ask maybe just one more of you, Karen. I'm wondering whether Stephen is still with us. He's not on my screen, so it may be that school life has taken over and he's needed elsewhere. But if I could ask perhaps just for one more piece of advice, if you could give one piece of advice to those people who are with us now in terms of looking at this term's data, what would that be?
I think my one piece of advice would be don't use it in isolation. So make sure that you're using the data, absolutely, because it is vital to use the data, but you need to look at it in the, the context, in that triangulation I was looking at earlier, looking at, teacher input, looking at tonal circumstances as well, to review the whole child. So definitely use the data because it's extremely useful, but don't use it in isolation.
Fantastic, thank you. You could do my job, Karen, I think. Message that rings true, absolutely. Thank you so much, Karen, and I know he's no longer with us, but to Stephen as well. Really interesting insight. So thank you again for all of that, and to our attendees as well. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for all your questions. We will try and make sure we respond to as many of those as we can. Yeah, that link to the Assessment Insights team there will eventually find its way to me. So if anybody does want to ask any more questions, then that might be a way through which you can do that. So on behalf of GL Assessment, to you, Karen, to Stephen, and to everybody else with us now, I hope that students and staff alike in your schools enjoy a really safe and successful end to term. Thanks very much.